In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can take a data set like this and turn it into a dashboard like this that tracks multiple metrics where you can easily slice and dice your data, look at multiple ranges, multiple filters, and have it update within seconds right in front of you. So let's get started. If you want to follow along with this video, I'm going to leave a link in the description for this video where you can download the same file that I'm working with. One of the most important things to do before you even start creating a dashboard is determining what sorts of metrics you want to track. Here I've got a lot of different fields. I've got dates, I've got customer data, I've got city, state, model, category, all sorts of metrics I can track in a dashboard. Ideally, you're going to want to consider at least having 4 to 5 metrics that you want to track, so that way you've got a useful dashboard that's tracking a lot of metrics. You just don't want to track sales and that be it. There's not much of a dashboard to work with there. So consider your data set, whether you need to add more data to it, or think a bit more about what sort of metrics you want to track. After that, the next thing you're going to want to do is make sure your data set is in a table. So right now I've just got a simple range set up, but I want to put this into a table, and that's for multiple reasons. The first is when I create a table, I can assign a named range to it easily, and then that makes it really easy when I'm setting up pivot tables and linking to it. So there's no ambiguity about which range I'm referencing. I don't have to remember, A1 to N500 or whatever the range may be. I'm just referencing the table. Another advantage is when you create a table, as you add data, the table's automatically going to expand. So again, you don't have to worry about adjusting that range when you add more data, because a common problem with dashboards and any sort of pivot tables is that when you go to refresh them, you'll notice that sometimes the data isn't adding the new information that you've added. And that can happen when you're referencing a fixed range as opposed to a dynamic one, like the case with the table. So to convert this into a table, just click anywhere on your data set and use Control T. And Excel's automatically going to detect this range. I'm going to leave my default option to say my table has headers, which it does. I'm going to hit OK. And now it's created a table for me. So table 1. That's not really useful. And this is why you don't want to just create multiple tables. I'm going to rename this to TBL for short for table, and then data. So that way, if I want to reference my data set, that's the named range that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to modify this formatting here to set it to a white font. And so you can see when you create a table, Excel automatically applies this default format. You can change it in the table design section, but it really doesn't matter for our purposes here. We're just using it to create a dashboard and make it easy to reference to later on. So now let's get into actually creating some pivot tables for use in a dashboard. Because anytime I create a dashboard, I like to create multiple pivot tables just to make it easy and organized to track. And I'm going to create multiple sheets here. So this sheet, I'm going to rename just my data sheet. And I'm going to create another sheet, which I'm just going to call PT, where I'm going to put all my pivot tables in. So now I'm going to go back to the data tab and go to Insert, select Pivot Table, and I'm going to select an existing worksheet, which is the one I've already created here, and just put it in an A1 or A1. Hit OK. And I've got my pivot table. And so one thing that I'm going to do initially is just create a simple pivot table where I've got sales here. And let's say I want to track different models. So I'll put shoe model here. And so an easy way to just produce multiple pivot tables isn't going back and forth and going insert and creating a pivot table each time. I can just copy this and paste it multiple times. So I'm going to set up 4 pivot tables for data that I want to track. And so these are all linked to the same data source. That's why I say this is an easy way to create multiple pivot tables, because you don't have to go into the data tab, go to insert new pivot table each time. Just copy and paste it. Now, the one thing to watch out for though is when you're creating pivot tables, especially multiple ones like I'm doing on this sheet, is you want to make sure you leave enough space. You don't want to have a situation where you refresh this pivot table and it's going to expand to the point where it's going to overlap with this one. That's when you're going to get an error message. So keep in mind how many fields you want to track, and make sure there's enough space just so that's not going to be an issue. So I'm just going to insert a few extra rows, even though I don't really need them. But the point is, you want to create some gaps so there's no chance that they're going to overlap with one another. And as I'm setting this up, setting these different fields up, I'm going to adjust that to, make sure if there's a situation where I do need more space, I'm going to expand. Because you just want to consider all these different options. Like in this pivot table, we've got shoe model. We've only got this many models. So there's no danger here of worrying that we're going to expand this unless, of course, we add new models. So I've left a few spaces here, but odds are I'm not going to need any more based on the data set that I'm working with right now. So shoe model is one metric that I'm going to track. So I'm going to track sales by the different shoe models. Over here, I'm going to change this metric from shoe model to, let's say, the shoe category. So I got my category and then sales. So really easy just to change the different fields, and I don't have to worry about making any sort of adjustments as in recreating the pivot tables from scratch. The next one I'm going to do is I'm going to track sales by state. So this can be a bit more challenging here because there's 50 states, right? So this is easily going to overlap with this. So what I'm going to do is cut and paste this just below this one for now, and I'm going to get rid of shoe model, put state. And so I've got the different states. So as you can see, that would be a problem because it's going to overlap with this pivot table. The next thing I'm going to do now is for this last pivot table, I'm going to use order date. And again, that's going to be also a bit of an issue here. So I'm just going to drag this one over here. I can always sort this out later, but the point is we want to make sure there's enough space in here. So I'm going to get rid of shoe model and add order date. And so it's automatically grouped this by month. And when you're grouping dates, what you want to consider is making sure you've got your grouping correct. So I'm going to right click, group. And so Excel's automatically grouped it by days and months. I don't need it sorted by days, but I do want months and years. Even though I don't have multiple years in here, it's a possibility that in the future I will have multiple years. So I don't want January 2024, for example, to be grouped in with January 2025. That could give me some unexpected results. So I want to make sure that if I'm separating my months, I'm also selecting years, even though I've only got 1 year. That's fine in this situation. Now that we've got some pivot tables set up, let's work on customizing them a little bit. So here I've got sales by date, but what I also want to do, I've got them by month. I also want to track cumulative sales values. So I want to track how much sales were for the month, but also on a year-to-date basis. So to do that, I'm going to go down and select this sales field again and drag it into the values section one more time. Although this is a duplicate field, I can change the way that it looks. So for example, if I select the value field settings here, I can select an option to show values as, and there's an option here that's going to show me a running total in this field. So I'm going to base it on months. Okay. And so now we've got our running total, and we can see 95,806, 95,806. So that matches to that because this running total should match up with this grand total here. Now, one thing you're probably going to want to do with your pivot tables is to make them easier to read is also to update these field settings one more time here. If I go to value field settings, so I can access it from here or going in the value section. But if I go to value field settings, I'm going to click on number format, and I'm going to use a currency format just to make it really easy to see what these numbers are. Because the problem is if you've just got a lot of numbers and there's no comma separators, it can be hard to read this data. So for any values where you've got where you're tracking sales, or you've got large numbers where you want commas, go in and change the value settings, because this way these settings will apply even if you refresh the data. Because if you just change the cells, the formatting right here on the spreadsheet without actually going into the value field settings, they're going to revert back to that original formatting when you do a refresh. So even though it may look fine before refreshing the data, once you do so, it's going to revert back. So to make sure that it sticks, go into the value field settings and make those changes in there. It's just a one-time change that you're going to need to do, but then you can make them and then you don't have to worry about those formatting issues again. So I'm going to do that for these other fields. And if you're working with different currencies, you can also adjust that as well here. You can use different symbols, or if you don't want the currency, you can just use a number format with a comma separator. But either way, whatever format you want to use, go through the value field settings just to make sure that it sticks, and so that you don't have to worry about it changing later on. So I'm going to keep currency for all these ones and hit OK. So now my data is a lot easier to see now. And what I'm also going to do in the case of my sales field, right now I've got sales and sales to. So I'm going to adjust this to make it a bit more descriptive. I'm going to right click value field settings and change this to cumulative sales. And here I'm going to change this one by field settings to say monthly sales, just to make them a bit more descriptive. Now for this pivot table where I've got sales by the different state, the obvious problem here is I don't want to track sales for all 50 states. That's going to be really cluttered, really hard to track. And so instead of what I'm going to do is just track the top 10. So to do that, I'm going to click on this drop down option here, go to value filters, select top 10. And it's going to default to top 10 items by sum of sales, which is exactly what I want. I want the largest 10 items. I hit OK. And now I can see my top 10 states in terms of sales. And so because I'm only tracking the top 10 states here, I could potentially move this pivot table a bit further up just to make sure that I'm spacing it out. Well, I don't also make it too big of a gap here. So really just use your discretion as to how you're spacing out these pivot tables if you're doing what I'm doing and setting them all up on one tab. It's just a lot cleaner, I find, to have them all in one place. And so now I'm going to create another tab, and this is going to be for my actual dashboard where I'm putting in all my charts. So the first chart that I'm going to start with is the one that showed sales by date, and I have my cumulative sales here. So I'm going to click on this chart and go to insert and open up the charts, and I'm going to use a combo chart just because I want to track monthly sales and cumulative, but I don't want them all to be the same. So one's going to be a cluster column, one's going to be a line for the cumulative sales. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit Control X to cut this and then paste it, Control V on my dashboard. Now, one thing I don't like about these pivot charts is I don't like these gray boxes here, these drop downs. I don't need to make these changes. I don't need to have the selections here. So if I click on this chart, you'll notice if I go under the pivot chart analyze tab, there's an option to disable these field buttons. I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to delete this legend here just because it takes up a bit more space, and I don't think I really need it. I think based on the sales numbers, it's a bit self-explanatory that one's going to be the monthly amount, one's going to be the cumulative. I mean, we could always add legends if you want, but I'm not going to in this situation. Another thing that I like to do with these types of charts is shrink this white space, this gap, just so it's not so big. So I'm going to right-click on any one of these column charts, format data series, and I'm going to adjust this gap with, so right now it's 219%. I'm going to set it to 100%. Just to shrink it down and make those columns a bit wider. And at this stage, you can apply your own customization that you want, depending on how you want your chart to look. I find it's always a good option to have a variety of colors just to make sure that they're not all the same type of charts, so they look a little bit different. So for this one, I'm going to select these columns one more time here. And under the fill bucket option, I can select a different fill color. So let's say a solid fill. I'm going to use a green fill, and a border being, I want to make sure we're not selecting automatic, but a solid line, and let's say a dark green background, dark green cutout, there we go. And for this line one, this one's a little bit trickier just because it's hard to figure out exactly what you're trying to grab. But let's say here for this line, I'm going to use a solid line, and I'm going to use a dark gray color. And what I also want to do is under the marker options, make sure I set it to automatic so it displays on here. So now I've got my line. Another thing I'm going to do with this chart is format the plot area here. So I'm going to select this and then apply a solid fill again. And this time I'm going to use a light gray color and add some transparency just to allow it to stand out a little bit more. There we go. So make it a bit of a subtle effect here. And I'm also going to add a chart element. I'm going to add grid lines. I've got the horizontal, but I want to add the vertical ones as well, just so I've got that nice grid layout as well in here. So now I'm going to create another chart, but before I do, I'm going to get rid of the grid lines on here just to make this dashboard cleaner and easier to look at. So I go to the View tab, I'm going to uncheck grid lines. That's going to clear that off. Now I'm going to go to my PT tab again, and this time I'm going to create a chart for sales by categories. So these are my categories here. I'm going to click in here and go to the Insert tab again, select Charts, and this time I'm going to select a pie chart, specifically a 3D pie chart. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to get rid of the field buttons again, get rid of the legend, because for a pie chart, I don't find this really helpful just because there's a lot of different items here. Instead, I'm going to add labels. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to add a title for this one just because there's already one in here. So I'm going to say sales by category. And what I'm also going to do is get rid of this fill color because I've got this white border here, this white background. So I'm going to select no fill and no border just to make it a lot easier now to blend in with other charts if I need to. And now I'm going to add the labels. So I'm going to right click anywhere on this pie chart, select add labels. And then what I'm also going to do is right click to format the data labels and select category name. I'm going to get rid of the leader lines. Now this is still a bit difficult to read, so what I'm going to do is right click, change data label shapes, select this rounded rectangle. And now what I'm also going to do is shrink the size, the font size of this, just to shrink it, just to fit in more of that text. And so now I can see all these different values, so I can shrink it down lower or small depending on how much you want to fit in. And I can expand this just to make it fit in a bit more. And I can adjust individual labels if I need to as well, especially if they've got longer names, just to make sure that everything fits in the category name as well as the sales dollars. But what I'm also going to adjust is the color scheme because I don't like all these different colors. I want a much cleaner, more subtle look. So I'm going to click on the design tab and I'm going to click change colors. And I'm going to use these shades of blue here. So from dark blue going to light blue. So nice, clean, gradual change as opposed to having many different colors jump out at you at once. The last thing I'm going to do is sort these values because right now I've got a mix. I've got no particular order here for these values. And ideally for a pie chart, we start the largest value followed by smaller and smaller until we get to the smallest piece. So to adjust this, I'm going to adjust the pivot table. So I'm going to right click and sort these values from largest to smallest. And when I do, now I've got my largest category first and then progressively smaller categories afterwards. So now this chart is good to go. So I'm going to select it, hit Control X to cut it, go back on my dashboard and paste it over here. So now I've got my two charts already ready to go. And as you can see, because I've got rid of that background, I can easily overlap these without having to worry that that white background is going to affect this other chart. The next chart I'm going to create is the one that shows sales by my top 10 states. So I'm going to go back to the PT tab and look for that pivot table. Here it is. So I'm going to go to Insert and open up Charts again. And this time I'm going to use a bar chart. Hit OK. And so I don't need the totals here. Get rid of the field buttons. And here I can say sales by top states. And for this one, I'm going to adjust the widths for these gaps here. So I'm going to right click anywhere on here, select Format Data Series, change the gap width to, let's say, 182 to down to 50%, just so it's a bit wider. And I'm going to adjust the color of this because I've already got a blue chart in there with my pie chart. So if I go to the Home tab, I can actually just manually change these colors here to, let's say, a purple color. That might be a nice mix here. And you can also adjust these on the fill bucket section as well. So there's multiple places where you can make these changes. And for the border, I always like to use a darker shade of the same type of color just so that the background is a bit more subtle on here. What I'm also going to do for this chart is for the plot area, I'm going to add a border. So I'm going to select the solid line and use a gray shading here, just so it's a bit of a subtle, clean look to it. And I'm also going to add some data labels because I'm going to get rid of these lines down there. And I'm going to right click, add data labels. And I'm going to format the data labels so they're not outside, but rather inside the end. And here again, I can also change the color of this. So I'm going to adjust this to a white font so it's easier to see these values. And I can also apply a bold effect if I want to, just to make them stand out a little bit more. So now I've got my total sales by state. For the actual chart though, I am going to turn off the border because I don't want that to show up. I just want the border outside the actual values. So I'm going to cut and paste this once again, put this onto my dashboard. And so now I've got a bit of variation here. And so you'll notice actually I've got that fill color. When I drag this over, you can see it's taken over that other chart. So I'm going to change that fill color so it's blank, and now it's no longer an issue. So that makes it really easy to blend in your charts however you want without having to worry about them, encroaching on another chart here. So now I've got 3 charts, and so my last one is going to be sales by shoe. So I'm going to go to the pivot table tab again, and so that gives me my last pivot table that I haven't set up yet here. And for this one, I'm going to insert a chart, and this one is just going to be a more simple cluster to column chart. I'm going to do similar things that I made with the other one. Get rid of the field buttons, get rid of the legend, and what I'm also going to do is modify that gap width for my data series, change this to 50%, and I'm going to change the color. In this case, let's do an orange color and an orange border. Let's say dark orange, and let's call this sales by shoe. For the plot area, I'm going to also add a border. This time, select a solid line again, and a grayish border, just so it's really subtle, just the light outline of that plot area. And so in this case, I'm going to leave these axis labels in here, and let's cut and paste this onto the dashboard again. And so now I've got another chart added to the mix. So this one I may want to spread out a little bit more just to make sure those labels fit in. There we go. And I'm going to get rid of this actual outside border here, just so there's no line, so it blends in nicely. So as you can see now, I've got my 4 charts here. They're going to be my main elements of my dashboard. And so I may just want to adjust these. This blue maybe is a little bit dark. I'm going to change this, make it a bit lighter. So there's a lighter option for the blue, which I'm going to use. And that one looks a bit nicer, pops out a little bit more. And spreading out these charts a little bit, just so everything fits in nicely. We want to make sure that they align fairly similarly to one another. If you want to adjust the widths of these different charts, the one thing you can do is if you select this chart, and while I do so here, I'm going to get rid of this border. If we go to the Format tab, you'll see that there's a height and width. So if we want to make sure each of these are the same, we can adjust these numbers. So this one is a width of 5. This one also has a width of 5. So we can change these just to make sure that they're the same size and shape, just in case you're trying to get them exactly to match up exactly. That's where you can make those changes. What I'm also going to do is add some elements that aren't linked to pivot tables. So I'm going to insert some rows here just to create some space here. And let's say I want to track just the total sales of everything that I have, regardless of what's filtered. So these pivot tables, I'm going to link them to slicers and have them dynamically update. But let's say I also want to just have a place where I can track the total sales. So what I can do here is, let's say, apply a light gray highlighting here. And so to do this, to calculate the sales, all I need to do is take the sum function, go to my data tab, and select the entire sales field. And so I've got my sales here, apply currency formatting, and adjust my decimal places here. So a really easy way to add a snapshot. I'll merge this, set it to the right, so we've got total sales, and I can bold this as well. And let's also add total items sold. So items sold, set that up as well here. Set another area here where we've got merge values. And just to make it consistent, I'm going to use the format painter to make sure that I'm applying it the exact same way. And so for this, I'm just going to be summing up a different column. In this case, go back to the data tab, and I'm selecting the quantity in column K. And in this case, I don't want the currency, so I'm just going to use the number here. So I can go in here and make sure that it is in thousands, that I can apply the thousand separator. So I'm just going to check this off, hit OK. So now I've got my total sales, I've got my items sold, and let's call this my sales dashboard. Bold this, and again, we can stretch it across multiple columns here if we need to. Just as sort of a title here. And so I've got my dashboard. And now what I'm going to do is now start connecting these pieces, these pivot tables together with different slicers. So I'm going to go back to the PT tab once more. And on any one of these pivot tables, as long as they're selected, I'm going to go to Insert and select Slicer. And I'll have all the different fields that are available to me to choose from. So let's say I'll select state, shoe model, category, size, color, all the different options that I may want to use to potentially filter by. So I'm going to hit OK. And so it creates those pivot tables for me. So those slicers for me. And so I can customize the look of these slicers. So there's different designs here. So I'm going to go with the green setup for these ones, just to make it all fairly consistent. Obviously, you can change these. There's all sorts of different layouts to choose from. And now what I can do is copy these onto the dashboard sheet. So if I Control X, paste them all on here. And now it's just a matter of adjusting this to make all these slicers fit in nice and neatly. So I'm going to stretch out column A little bit more just to make some space here. So for the color, I'm going to add this right here. And so this is where the slicer tab is going to be helpful, where I look at the height and width so I can adjust all the slicers so they match up. Well, ideally, I want to avoid leaving extra white space. I'd rather be scrolling through them as opposed to leaving extra space that's necessary. So I'll add shoe model underneath here. So I want to make sure it goes in snugly. And here again, if we want to be precise, we'll look at this one. This one is set to 1.25 for width. I'll change this as well to 1.25, just so it's really easy to make sure that it all matches up. And I may potentially want to stretch this out actually a bit more, just because this one's got a lot of values that are not fitting in. So perhaps make this one the bigger one. So I'll adjust this one instead to 1.68. And I'll stretch out my column a little bit more just to make sure that it leaves enough room, just so it's nice and snug. And so next I'm going to pull in the size. And again, let's adjust this one just so it fits in nicely there. And the width 1.68 as well. And then I'll pull in the category just below that as well. And so we can actually shrink the height down if we don't want to include everything. The point is you want to make sure you see all the selections that you want or that you think you're gonna need. And it's really just a balance of fitting everything in as best you can to make sure that the slicers are not too big, but at the same time not making it too difficult to scroll through everything. So here I may shrink down the shoe model a little bit just so it's not taking up as much space, so I can fit these other ones in here, because depending on which ones are more important, you may want to structure these a little bit differently. For the state, this one, we don't want to just have these values like this, because this is not very convenient to scroll through. Instead, if I go under slicer settings, there's an option to add multiple columns. So let's say I set up 5 columns because the state abbreviations are fairly small, right? So there's a lot that can be fit in there. So what I'm going to do is adjust the height of that first row. And now what I'm ideally going to look at is creating 5 rows. So I could shrink this down or extend this a little bit more. There we go. So now I've got the states. And so actually what I may want to do is, because that's taking up a bit more space, is add the columns to 10. There we go. And so compress this a little bit more, just because I don't want to stretch out my dashboard unnecessarily. But really it's up to your individual preference how you want this to look. So I'm still going to make room for one more addition, and that's going to be a timeline. So I can filter through these dates very easily. And to set up a timeline, all I have to do is go back to the pivot tables once again and go to Insert, Timeline. And as long as there's a date field, I can use that. And again, let's apply a green theme to this, cut, and then paste this back into my dashboard up here. And so this is going to make it easy now to scroll through the different dates. So let's say I'm going to put it right around here. The idea is I want these slicers to intersect neatly like so. So now I've got a nice intersection, nice nexus where they're all connecting in. And so it all flows in nicely here. So I can shrink this space a little bit more because ideally I want everything to match up to where that timeline is. So as you can see, a big part of setting up the dashboards is really the design element and making sure that everything looks nice and is set up properly. Ideally, what I don't want is any of these values being cut off here. So I want it to be nice and even like this. So again, I'll adjust this a little bit more here and then adjust this timeline so that one stretches down a little bit more. And so now it's easy now to go through both of these. And so now the magic to making all this work together is by linking these slicers to all the pivot tables. So if I've selected one of these pivot tables, I can right click on report connections, and I'm going to select all of my pivot tables that I've set up. So it's going to affect all of those pivot table selections. This one again, the timeline, report connections, make sure everything is selected. That way, what's going to happen is when you make any one of these selections, all your other charts are going to update. And that's what makes the dashboard really powerful in that sense, because a user can just click on any of these selections, everything's going to automatically update. I'm going to adjust this slicer because that one's overlapping with another one. There we go. And then again, right click, report connections. Now I can't select multiple pivot tables and apply this to all of them. I have to go one by one, but this is just a one-time setup that I have to do. So pivot table 2, 3, and 4, hit OK. Report connections one more time here. And I've got that set up. So now they're all connected. So now if I just want to look at the sales for all the black shoes, what's going to happen is all of my charts now are going to update. So now I don't have to worry about making multiple selections. Everything's going to apply. If I want to select multiple, I can hold control. Let's say black and blue, release, and now everything updates. So as you can see, all the charts update. Now these fields, because they're summing in total sales, they're not going to change. So that's why I wanted to show you those just in case you did want to track some values that are unchanged with respect to your pivot tables. So I'm going to shrink some of this gap here because I've got a little bit of extra white space that I don't really want to use, that I don't want to have here. And so at this point, really it's just how you want your pivot table to look and feel and how it should work. Now, what you may have noticed is the slicers did move after I made the selections, and I don't want that to happen. So I can lock them in place by selecting all these slicers and then adjusting their properties. So I'll make sure all the slicers are selected here. And if I right click on size and properties, under the properties section, there's an option that says don't move or size with cell. So it's not going to automatically adjust the slicer if you make any changes to the size. So now let's adjust these slicers once more, and this time they should be able to stay in place. So because I resize these cells, the slicers moved a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is move this down. And so now even if you adjust the size of your of your rows or your columns, or you make any adjustments like that, your slicers are not going to adjust. So we can check our slicer settings. So 1.68 for all these and make sure they're all lined up. So at this point, we're actually one other adjustment here. Again, want to make that line up nice and clean with that intersection point, because what I'm going to do in that section is this is where you can add a bit more customization. I'm going to show you how we can do that. And so if you're creating a report for whether it's your company, for a client, whatever the case may be, this is a good place where you may want to consider inserting a logo. So if we just go to insert and select the option to select the picture, place over the cells from your computer for wherever the case may be. Here I'm going to select the image that I want to use, insert it, and now I can resize it, put it in this section. So as you can see, now we've got a nice custom built dashboard that's in alignment with a certain color scheme. So if we have a a logo that's green or has a green highlight, we've applied those sorts of settings. And this is really easy to do that by customizing the colors and the look and feel of your dashboard. So by doing this, now we've got a nice dynamic dashboard that's really easy to update. We can update the data tab. And then once we've got everything entered in and entered into our data set, you can go to the data tab and refresh all. So this will update all your pivot tables. So when you make new entries, and then at that point, your user, whoever is looking at these values, can apply any sort of filters that they want to apply, any sort of values that you want to look at. If you want to reset any sort of slicers, you can hit this X here, and now you'll see everything at a glance. So these values here, because they're formulas, they are not going to change, but all these charts, because they're linked to pivot tables, are all going to be affected by these slicers, which are also all linked to those same pivot tables. So that's the magic of creating a dashboard like this, is just by having your user select any sort of range that they want to look at. If they want to look at a certain month, they can see that level of detail. If they want to stretch it out, they can look at a range of data, apply multiple filters across just specific subsections that they want to look at. You're going to see all those filters get applied right there. And that's what really makes these dashboards really effective tools, whether you're sending it to your manager or for your own personal reporting, just to see how you're doing or how a company or a business unit is doing. You can apply multiple filters and easily see all those changes happen within seconds right in front of you. So that's a wrap for this video. I hope you did learn something, and if you did, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.